Everyone thinks that teens in our world today use alcohol, tobacco, or drugs to cope with everyday struggles. You may think they do.
But they don't. Welcome to the But They Don't podcast, a podcast for teens by teens. Join us as we cover substance use prevention, mental health, community conversations, and more.
Welcome to the But They Don't podcast. My name's Alyssa.
And I'm Katie. Me and Alyssa are super excited for this podcast.
This is the third episode of our series, Community Conversations.
And before we introduce our guest, let's do our natural high of the week.
So I interviewed one of my good friends, Valentina. Valentina is an amazing tennis player, and she's heavily involved in some after-school clubs, too. She loves being active and going out with her friends. She usually uses these activities as an alternative to doing drugs. She's never done drugs, and she doesn't intend on doing them just because it's never really been appealing to her. Valentina has seen some effects in school with people doing drugs who vape. She told me those who do drugs in school are usually the ones who aren't doing good in school either. Valentina told me she's been offered a vape and she felt like it was peer pressure in that moment, and with them telling her that that nothing bad is really going to happen. But she knows the effects it has on people, and she didn't want to be a part of that.
I love how people use sports to get out of stuff.
Yeah.
Honestly.
That's a fun way to do it.
Yeah.
So, Katie, do you want to tell us about our blunt truth of the week?
Yes, I would love to. So since this episode is on mental health, I wanted to share some statistics.
There you go, Katie.
We're both struggling today.
We are struggling.
1 in 3 high school students experience sadness and helplessness. And the suicide rate has actually increased 44% since 2009. And all those studies were done in 2019. So imagine what they are now after COVID.
That's crazy. I know COVID stuff really just made everything jump.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and this week we're actually talking all about mental health, and I invited some amazing, well, it's just one amazing lady, and she's a part of the organization called NAMI. So what's your name?
My name is Hannah Wiggins.
And how long have you worked with this organization?
NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I have been a volunteer for a little over a year, since about last February.
So what does NAMI do?
NAMI is actually the largest grassroots mental health organization in the United States, and its purpose is really to help support and educate the millions of Americans who live with mental health conditions, as well as their loved ones who have to support them and are a big part of their lives. And there are a lot of state organizations and local affiliates that help educate. So, for example, I am a part of the AOP affiliate, which is Anderson, Oconee, and Pickens counties. And we have a program called Ending the Silence, which is a mental health education and suicide prevention program where we go into middle schools, high schools, colleges, and we talk about the basics of mental health. And there are a bunch of other classes that NAMI offers too for people who support loved ones with mental health conditions. We do crisis intervention training for law enforcement. We have classes for school staff and veterans. And NAMI also plays a big part in advocating for policy change across the country and leading public awareness events like Mental Illness Awareness Week and NAMI Walks.
Wow, yeah, I think it's really important that we educate a lot of people in mental health.
Yeah, because a lot of people are just, they don't really care, so they just go attack. Mm-hmm. And if they're educated, then they won't.
So what is your story with mental health?
As a volunteer for NAMI, we all have what we call lived experience, which is having experience with a mental health condition ourselves or a loved one. And for me, my lived experience comes from experiencing depression when I was in high school, around my sophomore and junior years of high school. And I took my mental health for granted up to that point because it had been good, but then I started experiencing changes. I was really hopeless, and I would isolate myself from other people. I wasn't involved in anything anymore. I wasn't eating or sleeping. And there's a lot of stigma involved in reaching out, a lot of fears that I had of the judgment that people might have for me if I were to talk about what I was experiencing. But ultimately, through my journey with mental health, I've discovered the importance of reaching out, the importance of seeking counseling if you need it, and having a support network, as well as using positive coping strategies to keep my mental health in a good place.
What were some of your coping strategies?
So there are what I like to call the big three that I focus on, which are sleep, eating, and exercise. I didn't realize how little sleep I actually got until my counselor pointed it out to me. But I was technically chronically sleep deprived because I was pretty much getting fewer than 6 hours of sleep like every night, which is super unhealthy, but I didn't even realize that. But once I decided to make some changes and get more than that number of hours of sleep a night, it made a huge difference in my mental health. And I also make sure that I eat regularly. And I make sure that I get physical activity almost every day, walking my dog, riding my bike, just getting outside in the sunshine. And I found that those are really, really integral to helping me stay at a good place for my mental health.
Yeah, that's great. So what do you think is misunderstood the most about mental health?
Starting from the very basics, I think a lot of people don't know that everybody has mental health. A lot of times we just consider that people who have mental illnesses are the only ones who have mental health, but that's not true. We all do. If we have a brain, we have mental health pretty much. So we have to understand that it's a part of our physical health. One example I like to use is for something like asthma. If you have asthma, the part of your body that's affected is your lungs. And if you have a mental health condition, the part of your body that's affected is your brain. So those are both parts of your body, just in different places. And I think people also don't know that mental health conditions and struggling with mental health are a lot more common than we actually think they are. And more people that we know are affected by it than we could imagine.
Right. And going on to that, would you say that you've seen a change in teenagers' mental health within the past 2 years, like since COVID lockdown?
Definitely. Absolutely. We have done research that shows that even before lockdown, 81% of teenagers have said that mental health is a significant issue for young people in the United States. But in 2020, 64% of teens reported that the experience of COVID would have a lasting impact on their mental health. And 1 in 5 reported that the pandemic has had a negative impact on their mental health. And that has to do with a lot of the issues that we really never had to face before that COVID has presented, like isolation, not being able to hang out with friends, adapting to virtual school, which can be a really big adjustment for a lot of people, and changes in sleep habits and other routines. And you guys mentioned how the suicide rate has increased over the last decade. And even since 2019, hospital admissions for suspected suicide increased by 51% for girls ages 12 to 17. And we know that at least 3 million individuals who are in the adolescent age range have had serious thoughts of suicide since the pandemic. So we know that COVID has caused a lot of serious issues, and we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, it's really crazy. I don't have any friends I've never really been through having a friend commit suicide, but I know people who have, and it's really crazy to see the struggle that they go through too with that.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say are some unhealthy or some healthy coping skills whenever dealing with mental health?
Great question. Definitely the big three that I mentioned before: sleep, eating, and exercise, but also different coping strategies that are more individualized. Like maybe you do sports, you're on a sports team, or just sports for fun. That can be a great coping strategy. Writing, art. A lot of people I hear from say they love to just listen to music and do things around the house. Maybe you like to clean. I don't know. Some people really enjoy de-stressing with cleaning.
Not me. No, not me.
But I mean, really, it just depends on what your hobbies are and what works for you. I'm an introvert, so my positive coping strategies are not going to involve clubs or hanging out with other people. I'm going to choose to read a book or hang out with my dog, but maybe something with other people works for you.
Mm-hmm. What would be like some unhealthy ones that many people turn to?
One that we don't always consider a negative coping strategy is stress eating. I know that most of us have had the experience of having those negative emotions and just going all in on the
tub of ice cream.
Yes. Yeah, eating that. And that can have a really big impact on our mental health that we don't even realize. But some more prominent ones, I guess, would be isolating. If we just cut ourselves off from other communication with other people, that's not really healthy. And definitely self-harm is a negative coping strategy, as well as using drugs or alcohol to try and deal with stress or negative emotions.
Yeah. Like, doesn't drugs kind of act as, like, an unhealthy...
Yeah, some people use that as an
thing.
unhealthy coping strategy, and it really just worsens things.
But isn't it also, like, unhealthy, like, it causes unhealthy amount of hormones, like, in your brain? Or whatever's in your brain.
Yeah, it definitely has major impacts on the way that your brain works healthily. And we don't always think about the ways that our brains change when we use drugs or alcohol. But even using drugs as basic as caffeine can change the pathways in our brain. So we have to be careful with how we use those.
Right.
I finally figured out the word.
Good job,
It
Katie.
was enzymes.
There you go. Okay.
I think the word you're looking for is neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is literally us every time before the podcast.
Oh, it's worse before the podcast.
So what do you think people should do when they think they have a mental health condition?
Reach out for help. There are so many resources that we might not even be aware of that we can use. And one of those is what we call trusted adults. That sounds pretty self-explanatory, but basically just having that adult figure that you can talk to about whatever's going on. And that can be parents, other family members, teachers, coaches, youth leaders, mentors. The list goes on. But those resources are there and available. And you can also look into talking to a mental health professional if you're really struggling. Counselors, therapists, doctors, they are there for that exact purpose to help you with your mental health. And there are also a lot of resource numbers. NAMI specifically has a helpline, and the number for that is 800-950-6264. And that's a helpline that you can call and talk to somebody about something that's going on. But maybe like me, you really hate talking on the phone and it gives you anxiety and you just want to text. NAMI also has a 24/7 crisis line. You can text the word NAMI to 741-741. And there are also numbers like the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and you can go online to NAMI's website, nami.org, and find other resources. But I would say really find your people. Find that support system, the people who are going to be there for you no matter what mental health difficulties you might be experiencing.
Yeah, and we will put those numbers in that website down in the description in case
Not
y'all
the website,
need to
the
use them.
description.
Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm really questioning myself
It's
today.
okay, Katie. It's okay. Okay, so what should people do? Nope, I just asked that question. What can happen if a mental health disorder goes untreated?
That's a really important thing to consider. It gets worse, essentially. I like to use the analogy of a broken leg. If you break your leg and you decide not to go to the hospital or the doctor, what's going to happen to that leg? It's going to get worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you eventually go to the doctor to get help for that, your leg is going to be much harder to fix than it was initially. And the same thing happens with our mental health. If we see warning signs of a mental health condition, we see those symptoms, we want to reach out for help as soon as possible because those symptoms can become more severe. You could have more physical issues, relationships can be hurt, alcohol and drugs might be turned to as a negative coping strategy, and it can even lead to suicidal thoughts or even attempting or completing suicide. So we know that thankfully mental health conditions are treatable and there are a lot of treatment options, but unfortunately the statistics show us that the average delay between the onset of mental illness symptoms and treatment is 11 years. And that's really concerning, right? Because like if you find out you have cancer, you're not going to wait 11 years to go get treatment.
Right.
So we want to raise that awareness about mental health symptoms so that people who are experiencing those symptoms can get the help that they need so that they can live a healthy life as soon as possible.
Yeah, so how can friends support each other when there's a mental health problem?
Friends are a key part of mental health. Friends have been important in my journey, finding those friends who are real, genuine friends who are going to stick around when I'm having mental health difficulties. But one thing friends can do is they can recognize warning signs in their friends and share concerns. Maybe you notice that your friend is having some changes in behavior or mood or personality or sleeping habits. They're just not acting their usual self. And you want to just kindly share your concerns and ask if they're okay. That's a great way to support your friends. You can encourage your friends to talk to a trusted adult if they feel like they need to. and you can share those resources with support and information like those numbers. Really, it just boils down to being a good friend, checking in, listening when your friend has something to say, offering that support, and helping them to stay positive and not get into a dark mindset. That was important for me. I used to isolate a lot when I was experiencing depressive symptoms. I would cut myself off from all my friends, but now my friends are ones who don't let me do that. They keep me accountable. They text me, they make sure that I'm, engaging with people, and that's been a huge help to me.
What age do you think mental health really starts to affect people?
It starts younger than we might think it does. 50% of people who have mental illness report that they had symptoms start by age 14, and 75% of those people report that symptoms started by age 24. So we know that those teenage years are really important for development and formation of the brain and other things, but there are a lot of events that can happen during that time that can affect mental health, and we need to be aware of those and understand that young people have a lot of stressors, right? Young people deal with a lot, especially with COVID the last 2 years. And we also know concerning suicide is now the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34. And we also see it really young, younger than we think. We have middle schoolers and even elementary kids who have friends talking about suicide and even attempting suicide. So we definitely want to make sure that we are providing resources and support for the young people who need it.
Yeah, and I really think that mental health has become like a really hot topic recently too. Like people have been a lot more open about talking about it. Like you hear about it a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and honestly, before COVID, I never really heard about it that much. And then once COVID hit, it all was like, hey, mental health, mental health, mental health, and I was like, holy crap, this is like extremely important, and I didn't realize that until COVID started. Honestly.
Yeah, a lot of times you don't realize how important something is until it starts being negatively affected by those things like COVID.
So, kind of going back to supporting someone with mental health, how can teachers and admin help support teens that they see struggling in schools?
Teachers and administrators are a lot of times the front line of noticing what's going on with students, because a lot of students have families where their parents, their siblings aren't really going to notice what's going on. So it's definitely important for teachers and administrators to be aware of what's going on with their students. I would encourage them to be that trusted adult that students are going to feel comfortable talking to about hard stuff. Make it clear that you are there for them if they need to talk about something. I would also encourage making it clear that it's not okay to use stigmatizing language or engage in stigmatizing behavior. So that's stuff like name calling or labeling, stereotyping, discriminating, and even bullying people with mental health conditions, because that's not okay. And that's something that unfortunately happens a lot in schools. And I would also say that it's important to make those resources like those help numbers and information about how to contact mental health professionals available to students.
So what advice would you give teenagers struggling with mental health?
I think my number one would be don't keep your struggle a secret. Reach out for help, because there is someone who will help you. This was important for me because I kept my struggle with my mental health a secret because I had a negative experience sharing what I was experiencing. And so sometimes the first trusted adult that you talk to about it, they might not listen. They might not have a good reaction, but try to find someone who will listen. I would also say be an advocate for yourself. That's something I've learned. Nobody else can be an advocate for me. I have to be able to tell my story because I'm the only one that can. So even if you seek out help from a medical professional, you might find one that you're not really vibing with, and that's okay. You might want to find someone else who you are vibing with. Maybe you try out a medication for your mental health condition and you don't like the side effects or it's not working. That's okay. Fight to find one that does, because you're the only one who can really argue for what you need the most. I would also say practice those positive coping strategies whether or not you're struggling. Those are really important for people who have mental health conditions, who are struggling with mental health, but they're also important for you if you're not struggling with mental health, because just like how getting enough sleep and eating right and exercising keeps you in a physically healthy place, that's also going to keep you in a mentally healthy place for the most part. And don't be afraid to ask for help, and get help as early as possible. Don't let that 11-year delay be applicable to you. Make sure that if you are struggling, reach out for help, because there are people who are going to help you, and you want to be able to live well and live healthily.
And Katie, I know you shared a little bit about your mental health stuff before too. I know you mentioned that you use working out as one of the main things.
Yeah, I do.
To cope.
Yeah, and then I also have a therapist who I meet with. So, and without her, I definitely would not be who I am now. And without my friends, without my family, I definitely would not be here doing this and sharing this stuff with you guys.
Yeah. And that's just kind of an example of why it's really important to get help when you think you need it. Well, thank you so much for coming and being on the podcast this week. We are so happy to have you.
Thank you for having me.
We really enjoyed you being on the show with us, or episode. You know what I mean.
So we have some upcoming events. May 21st, we have our teen movie night. We're partnering with the Pickens City Police Department. We are showing Grease. Middle school showing is at 5 p.m. and the high school showing is at 7:30 at Haygood Community Center. And we want everyone to be in their be dressed in their best Grease themed outfits. Make sure to follow us on social media at Pickens County Youth Board and for Facebook, and then we are PCYB on Instagram and TikTok.
Yep. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you'll have a great day.